What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Factory Tour. Sorry, I'm making you wait in between these shows. My body was just not cooperating with me last week, but I am healthy. I am ready to go. The fantasy regular season is at an end, and I'm here today with my friend Ben Winkler to kind of usher in the fantasy playoffs, talk a little bit about how our teams are doing, and then jump into the important part of the show today, which is answering your questions, your mailbag questions. There's a nice variety, some of them pertaining more to the end of this season, some of them talking about the off season. We can start kind of looking ahead now. We're already at that time. So I'm excited to get into it. Ben, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty great. It's peak finals season over here at the university, so that's been taking up most of my time. But I'm excited to get a little mental break from that and talk about fantasy playoffs, of which I'm not involved in all that much.
Well, it's a very stressful time of the year. I can't say that I always handle it very gracefully. I get really invested into sub teams where I just feel like this has got to be the year, and then it doesn't always go as well as you think because this is just such a crazy game. It's so random. Um, so it's important to try to keep it all in perspective, be calm about it. Um, I like the fact that I get to start drafting my playoff best ball teams, NFL playoff best ball teams now. So I have something I can like look forward to once all my regular season things are over. It's like kind of splitting my focus between those two, so I'm not so mentally invested in how the playoffs go. But it is obviously super fun, especially when you win. Hopefully, I'll be doing a little bit of that. Um, I wanted to start things off here with just a little bit of a recap of how the regular season went for me, and Ben's also offered to share how his teams are doing. Um, Starting off, I'm in a total of 18 leagues, so I just wanted to break down kind of how my season went. This is my first year playing in this many leagues. I joined like 6 or 7 this year, so I'm in more dynasty leagues by far than I've been in before. And of these 18 leagues, 5 of them I tanked. All 5 of these leagues I did intend to tank before the season started. So I kind of looked at these teams. I was like, this isn't my year. And I started selling off as early as I could. And I was able to get the 101 in 4 out of those 5 leagues. The fifth one was a dynasty best ball league where I had just a lot of pieces that ended up kind of doing well, like Sam Howell and Brian Robinson, Jordan Addison. And I wasn't really able to sell these pieces off fast enough. So I ended up just holding on to some of them. I ended up with the 103. So I'm happy with that, securing a lot of 101s. That's what you're trying to do. Anytime that your season is not going in for the championship, you want to be putting yourself in the best position to get that first overall pick. Um, and then out of the 13 other teams that I wasn't tanking in, I was actually able to make the playoffs in all of those leagues, which I was really happy about. I definitely had to pull some trades that I maybe wouldn't otherwise make, or trades that I might end up regretting to kind of make that happen. I do have a couple of 6 seed teams that I think were like good enough to keep trying, but ultimately maybe worth pulling the plug on sooner if I have that first round exit. But 5 of those playoff teams are bye teams. That's what you're really trying to set yourself up for. I'm always trying to think, what can I do to get myself that bye week? That gives you such an edge in terms of like your odds of winning. So 5 out of 13, I think that's like pretty solid. Obviously could be better, but we've got 5 teams in really good position, already made it through to the semifinals, essentially. And so, just got to win 2 games to get yourself that championship trophy. So that's how I'm doing, kind of top down or high level view. Ben, why don't you talk about your stuff now?
My year definitely did not go that like according to plan as yours. I have 7 like real dynasty leagues, and then I have one sort of like goof off league with my guys from back home. It's like a 6 team super
Mhm.
flex league with like it's like start 13 or something like that. So I don't really count that one. And we all make the playoffs in that one too. So there's really no point. I had one tanking team at the start of the year, and the rest of them I felt solid or close to solid about. And then I ended up adding 2 more full tanks. I have 2 102s out of those 2, and then the other one, it's a Devi league, so I don't quite have like an elite draft pick, but I have a really nice slew of guys coming in. I have Jaden Daniels in that league already on my Devy roster. And then I have 2 leagues that are sort of like a year away from being a year away this year. One of those is my home league, so that really stung. I finished in like 5th, and it's a 10 team and with a 14 playoffs, so just barely missed out on that. I have like Puka in that league. Bijan and Brees is my RB core. It's a 1 QB, and I have Lamar. I really felt good about it this year. I thought it was going to happen, and didn't end up sneaking in. And then I have 2 playoff teams, no bye weeks, so we're underdogs. We're the Cinderella story, and we're gonna try to pull something off here, try to get my money back.
Yeah. You got 2 shots.
I do.
Anything can happen. That sounds like that one team though has got a nice young core. It's gonna probably age pretty nicely.
Yeah.
But it doesn't always go to plan. Like if you think about all the injuries this year, there's a lot of teams that went into the year planning to tank because of Caleb Williams, but there's a lot of teams that got forced into it just with all the injuries. Like I have one team that, to be quite honest with you, I probably really screwed it up long term because I just made a lot of ill-advised trades trying to stay in contention. I started the year with my quarterbacks as Kyler Murray, Deshaun Watson, and Anthony Richardson. And then I ended up trading Kyler in a deal for Joe Burrow 2 weeks before he got hurt. So like I've just been trying my hardest to field a quarterback all year. And so like I've made some definitely lost some value trying to keep that position filled. Managed to trade a future 5th for Joe Flacco this week. Came in pretty clutch. So he's going to help me out through the playoffs, but it's been really tough with the injuries this year. So there's a lot of teams that are kind of retooling and looking ahead. But one thing I do try to do with all my teams is I also try to keep track of how I am positioning myself for the future, because you don't want to overextend yourself too much in a given year, especially if you do play like a portfolio of teams. If you're just playing 1 or 2, it's pretty easy to see how you're positioned long term. But over like 18 leagues, you can really lose track of like where you're sitting. You can end up, if you have, if all your teams end up tanking in a given year, like you're paying a lot of buy-in, and you're going to have to do really well in future years to kind of make that up. So I try to keep track of my rookie picks, especially firsts, to see like how much value am I still holding on to across my leagues. So for example, over my 18 leagues, I have a total of 13 2024 firsts. With most of my teams being in contention, I'm okay with being like under. Like ideally I'd like to have 1 first per team, like as an aggregate, but because I have so many teams that are contending this year, I'm okay being a little bit under. But I do have 21 2025 firsts as it stands. So I have more than 1 25 first per team. And so that makes me feel better about like pushing some chips in this year, because I know overall my teams are set up to accrue value over the next 2 years, at least like on par with other teams in my leagues.
Yeah, I definitely am on board with that too. I have a lot of 2025 first, especially in comparison to 2024 first. I think it's interesting that you're in 13 playoffs and you also have 13 firsts. So it's kind of cool how that ended up lining up for you. I did want to shout myself out because I pulled off something you and Jacob talked about. I guess that's more than a couple episodes back now, but I was sitting in the 2 seed after week 9. I was 7-2 in one league. And I noticed that I still had the second lowest max points for, because I had this super slim roster that kind of caught some scheduling breaks. And I was like, okay, that's something to monitor. I ended up dropping 4 straight. So I fell to I dropped 3 straight, and I fell to 7-5. And I looked at the roster, and then a week later, Mark Andrews got hurt. And that was when I knew that, like, okay, might need to go get my first back and try to do something with this. So I ended up pulling off the trade. I got my pick back by convincing him it's the 103 with me, and it's the 10. It's like a playoff first with you. Like, let's meet in the middle. Right. We valued it around like a 105, and I got the pick back. I was able to get my push out of the playoffs, and now I have the 102 and the 104 in that league. I have 3 firsts, 4 seconds, and then 3 2025 firsts in that league now. So I'm set up super nicely, and it's fun. It's kind of fun doing a mid-season tank.
Yeah, I mean, I remember talking to you about some of those deals, and it was definitely like a masterful tank from you. And like sometimes you just got to do it. That team wasn't going to win the championship, and so I mean, to sit here and be like, look at how well I failed. Like, yeah, no, actually that's a great thing because it does set you up better for the future. And it gives you the best chance to like get back on your feet later on. The worst thing you can do is like, you see a boat that's just taking on water, like trying to sit there and, like throw it out one bucket at a time. If the hole's too big, that's not going to work and you're going to sink. So that's what you got to do sometimes. And you should definitely be happy about that. One thing I have been doing for the past week on as many playoff teams as I can that don't have trade deadlines is buying Ezekiel Elliott, which is like the grossest and most unexpected thing for me to be doing in the year 2023. But I think I've traded for Zeke in 4 leagues this week. It just sort of clicked. Like I was talking to a friend in a trade negotiation, and I was trying to get Zeke like thrown into the deal, and they kind of pointed out like just how useful he could really be here. Like he could be one of the signature league winners, just getting 98% of the running back touches for the Patriots, getting so many targets. It's not a great offense, but it's such a good role that you could basically see him doing like what Rachaad White's been doing all year. And he's very gettable in most spots for not that much. So like I've traded Jerome Ford straight up for him in 2 leagues where like, yeah, Jerome Ford's like somewhat young. Like I think he's 24, 25, and he's been like a solid backup this year. But do we really foresee Jerome Ford getting a backfield to himself at any point? Like, is he going to be a feature back? Like he's not even getting goal line work right now. So I see that kind of a move where, yeah, I'm giving up a little bit of future value, but I'm getting a guy who can really help me for 3 weeks, and I'm not really giving up anything that substantial to do it. So I really, really like Zeke right now as like a low key buy who's very gettable if he's not already on a contender.
Yeah, he's been going for like 20-25 thirds in my leagues and stuff like that. It's a very palatable cost. And like you said, it's kind of like there's always like a couple of random running backs who end up being genuine league winners, and like the difference in between you winning and losing a fantasy championship. And it's usually going to be worth such a low cost of entry to take the shot on that, even if your odds aren't going to be 100%. Like I bought a Jerick McKinnon share, and then he ended up in the end zone. So like that was kind of cool to see, and maybe he'll do what he did last year again. I haven't bought to a ton of Zeke, but as we've established, I don't have that many contenders to really buy him on. So I have him on one of my 2 playoff teams, and I'm definitely pretty thrilled about the role that he just proved to have. And he did it against like a not horrible Steelers defense either. So
yeah, I mean, he's an automatic start throughout the fantasy playoffs. And I think he's the perfect guy to buy because like I've been preaching all season about not overpaying in win now trades, like trying to boost your odds because there's so much that's random and there's so little you can actually move the needle after a certain point. I feel like he's kind of the perfect compromise where, yeah, you can sacrifice a little bit of value to add him to your team, but like the amount of win equity that you can add at cost is like probably the most efficient buy on the board right now. Whereas if you're trying to go out and buy like the Alvin Kamaras of the world, you're still paying a good amount at this point in time. You're certainly giving up more than a future third, or like you probably can't trade Jerome Ford for him. And I understand that because he probably does have some future value, but ultimately when you're investing in a running back that's like on the decline, is older, no longer is worth their contract, the future is going to be murky. I'd rather just treat all of those guys like they're 1-year rentals and then buy the cheapest one. And so with Zeke, you could have done it really early in the season with Kyron Williams, and that would have been really smart to do. I did not end up really getting any Kyron, but like that's what you're trying to do. Find the guy that can win it for you this year. They don't have to be sexy. They don't have to have a lot of name value to put 20 points in your lineup.
Most definitely. That Zeke game was awesome, and I don't know. It was fun to see him doing that again, and he has been on a much smaller workload than he's ever been on this year, and he actually genuinely looked fresh in that game. And I do think that he'll be really solid, and he's like pretty much a set it and forget it guy at this point.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. He honestly did look like pretty decent in the game. Like I'm not a film guy at all, but he didn't look notably washed. He wasn't like Austin Eckler running 8 miles an hour down the sideline or whatever. So
I have no words for that.
That's pretty cool. Poor Austin.
I have a lot of words for that. but I'm none that I need to air out any further than I already have.
Life comes at you fast. Look, I have one Austin Eckler share, but it's in my most important league. That I'm rolling him out for the playoffs. So I'm really hoping for some like big PPR performances. I have the chance to reset an Empire league that has a pretty substantial pot at this point if I win the championship this year. So fingers crossed for Eckler. Yeah, in the playoffs, but
hoping for a couple touchdowns for you, man. That offense is totally going to be as high powered as it's been all year too.
Man, Easton Stick is really coming in at the 11th hour to just tank.
You are not ready for this Thursday night football game, dude. Oh my God.
My Keenan Allen shares are weeping. I only have one Herbert. Well, actually, I have no Herberts now. We'll talk about that. I made a trade today, but but I have a bunch of Keenan Allen on playoff teams, and I am not excited for Easton Stick to be the one targeting him. So it feels bad.
Thursday night. This is, if you thought last Sunday was bad when the Raiders went up against Josh Dobbs and Nick Mullins, wait till you see those boys up against Easton Stick.
It's going to be a sight to behold, but I will be tuned in because I have some players, and I have some Devontae Adams. I've got Keenan Allen.
Yeah.
So I'm fingers crossed for the over in that one, but I'm not expecting a ton. All right.
Anything can happen. It's a crazy sport.
We are going to jump into the mailbag here. We have a good number of questions to get through, so we'll see how it goes. We'll try to keep it efficient, but some of these might be worth going into a little bit deeper. We'll just see where the night takes us, I guess. But we've got some familiar faces here asking the questions. Love to see it. And like I said in the intro, a wide range of topics as well. So we're going to kind of bounce around. I didn't sort these out today. I was a little bit too lazy. I just put them in order. But we'll bounce around between stuff that pertains to right now, immediately actionable, and then stuff that's kind of more speculative towards the off season. And that's where we're going to start here. Question from Todd, Dynasty S Flex on Twitter, another analyst from the Dynasty Market Watch podcast. He's actually going to be my guest on the show next week, but he wanted to get his fingerprints here on the show a little early. So he's got a good question for us. What quarterback outside the top 10 do you most want to invest in this offseason? You can take top 10 a few different ways. I'm referencing Fantasy Calc for my answer, but I'd like to start with you, Ben, in terms of, what do you consider the top 10, I guess? And then how do you feel about this question?
I should have wrote down a top 10 in my notes. Instead, I just put Kyler Murray with a question mark because I wasn't sure what the top 10 we were going to be using was going to be. So I guess I'd start it with him. We talked about this last time I came on, but I did not acquire as much Kyler Murray as I thought I did in my head this offseason because we went on and on about how nice his price tag was for the upside that's there. And then he immediately has come back and proven to be worth that investment. And I just haven't done it yet. And I still think that he'll be a good value this offseason, especially leading up to April, because people aren't sure if they're going to invest in the offense or back Kyler Murray, but we can all kind of tell that they will. So I think that there's definitely going to be a really nice buy window from the end of the fantasy season leading up to the draft. And then after that, he'll probably be sort of out of reach. And then I'll just list like three more guys who I also wanted to include. Will Levis being one of them, Jordan Love, and Jaden Daniels. Three fairly similar kind of guys who are obviously still have a ton to prove, but are a bunch of guys who I sort of believe in as franchise guys and guys I'm definitely going to be trying to add my exposure to. I think that Will Levis's performance last night we're recording this on Tuesday, by the way. I think that his performance last night was absolutely sick. Like that was some dope football that he played last night. So I think he's their guy, and I think that they'll continue to build that around him as well.
Yeah, I definitely think they're gonna stick with Levis next season, which is great for him. I didn't catch that game last night. I was kind of just following the box score, but I do want to go back and watch some of it because I am very interested in the Will Levis experience. I have a couple shares, and I'm cautiously optimistic about him. But definitely a guy I might look to add some more of depending on where his price goes. As far as fantasy calc is concerned, Kyler Murray is the QB 11, so he qualifies for this. You're not going to see a buy window as nice as the one that we already got, but I do agree his price is probably still going to lag behind where it should be. I think he belongs in that end of first round startup pick area, and I think he will be probably in the second round. So there's still going to be a little bit of value there. I would definitely grab him before they draft Marvin Harrison Jr.,
Exactly.
which I am absolutely manifesting into existence because I can't buy any more Kyler Murray. I already have 50% exposure to Kyler Murray in my portfolio, and
That's actually insane.
that's dangerously high. So I will be probably looking
That is
to
quite high.
diversify off of that at my earliest opportunity. But like most of them are on teams where I was barely able to field any quarterbacks until he came back, and he's finally like he's back and every other quarterback is hurt. So there's like no one to trade for right now. But in the offseason, hopefully pivot some of those into some similarly ranked players. I did want to throw out Anthony Richardson, who I'm definitely going to be trying to get back in on a little bit. He's currently the QB 12 on Fantasy Calc.
What?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I don't know where his startup value is going to come in. Like, we'll see what they say about his shoulder. I guess positive reports are going to have people very excited to get back in on him. But as of right now, I definitely think he's gettable. It's really tough to know where these values are going to go once the season ends, because so much is hung up in the fact that like some of these quarterbacks are scoring points right now and some of them aren't. And so we are going to see a big shuffling in the position.
That better be true, because if Anthony Richardson is at QB 12 value, as like once the offseason begins, I'm going to be at 100% exposure before I know it, man. QB 12 is crazy. He's my QB like 8 right now, and that's like factoring the injury.
Right. Well, names ahead of him, we've got Dak's ahead of him. I'm assuming after the season, that's probably gonna. I mean, I mean, Dak's killing it right now. Like it's hard to really fault him. Trevor Lawrence is a guy who's ahead of him, who I think you could definitely make the argument for Richardson. Tua's ahead of him, so like I definitely can see the case up to like 8 or 9. But I mean, it's really top heavy at the position right now. We're going to get an influx of a couple more guys there at the top, but it's going to be like a top 15, 16, and then just absolutely like nothing after that. So it's
pretty much.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Really gross answer, if you want to go down the board a bit, is Deshaun Watson.
I knew you were going to say that, Paul. I had a feeling as soon as I saw that question today, I was like, Paul's going to talk about Deshaun Watson.
I mean, honestly, it's not a good answer because I don't want to invest in him. I'm obligated to throw out there that he's currently valued at QB 20, and he wasn't actually that bad this season when he played. Like he was,
especially the last time we saw him.
Yeah, I mean, he was arguably like a mediocre, like a middling starter, but like he's a middling starter who scored over 20 fantasy points like a bunch of times this year when he was healthy, and has mega contract security. Like at the cost that he's going at right now, you don't need him to be an actually elite quarterback to pay off that price pretty easily.
And they're also not going to be anywhere near like any sort of replacement range. They're boxed into just building around him at this point. So
exactly,
it's hard to see how his value could go down, other than him obviously playing worse than he has been.
So I think he's going to be a solid buy. Maybe tough to click, but I do think where his price is going to settle in is going to be pretty appealing overall. Moving on, we have another question from a friend of the show, David. David from the Bulletproof Discord on Twitter, known as DSP4150. He asks, what top 25 asset is most at risk of value loss during the offseason? So top 25, basically that's your first 2 rounds of startups. So you can think of that in terms of a startup draft, or in terms of, again, I'll use Fantasy Calc, but like KTC, anything like that. Who's in the top 25 that's at risk of losing value? I'll start off here with TJ Hawkinson, who's the 19th ranked asset on Fantasy Calc right now among all players. I mean, TJ Hawkinson's having a great season. He's certainly adding more value than I expected him to. Like, I wasn't a big Hawkinson guy coming into this offseason. But I think we have potential for a lot of quarterback uncertainty in Minnesota. And then also more tight end depth at the position than we saw this past offseason with Kincaid, Laporta, McBride, and Mark Andrews coming back from injury. So there's less scarcity at the position. The Minnesota offense could be in flux. I think for a guy who's not like super duper young, who's just kind of in his normal prime, I think those factors could be enough to kind of push him down a little bit into like more the 3rd round range in startups. So not massive loss, but enough things weighing him down where he falls out of that top 25.
He's also not had the second best receiver in the entire league playing with him when he usually does have that guy playing. And
Good
also,
point.
if you project a second-year leap from Jordan Addison, there's a lot of ways where you could see Hawkinson's target share really plummet, especially, and like his overall target volume could also fall if they start passing less. They've been
Mhm.
throwing at a pretty unsustainable rate this year. And like you said, the quarterback situation is quite murky as well. So I'm right there beside you on Hawkinson too. This is another one that I should have referenced KTC or Fantasy Calc for, because I looked at my own top 25 rankings and I was like,
That'll work.
everybody in my top 25 is really insulation based. Like everybody here
Right.
is young. It's like Garrett Wilson and Olave and Brees Hall and Gibbs. And I'm like, none of these guys are really going to fall out of the top 25, in my opinion. But my top 25 is pretty much who I would be drafting in a startup in a couple months. But I did have Tyreek Hill in there. And I do think that's worth mentioning, because if we believe in his prophetical announcement at the beginning of the year that in 3 years there will be no more Tyreek Hill in the NFL, we're
Right.
down to 2 after this, and people are going to start thinking about that. And market-wise, that probably opens a great buy window for any team that you think could be contending next year. Definitely want to go buy Tyreek Hill for, I don't know, like a late 2025 first. You might be able to pull that off after draft season comes and goes. But I do think that market-wise, he will dip. And I think that's a positive thing for most people.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you get a 29, 30-year-old player ranked that highly, they're just naturally going to lose some value in the offseason.
Absolutely,
Like
yeah.
a lot of his value is tied up in what he's currently adding to contending teams. As soon as we turn the page over into January, February, we're a long way off from point scoring season. And, you know, the number next to age is a lot more valuable at that point than the number next to fantasy points per game. So I agree with you. Tyreek Hill and Christian McCaffrey in the same vein.
Yeah.
Both are primed to lose some value and then probably regain most of that value in August. But that's
So
just
buy them all
that's just
summer
a
is what we're
cycle.
trying to say right here.
Yeah, pretty much. Perfect. All right, next question we have from the D is silent on Twitter. What do we Herbert managers with competitive teams do now? Well, I guess that depends on if you have a trade deadline. If you have a trade deadline, I guess Cry would be top of my list, followed by see if maybe somehow Joe Flacco or Jake Browning is on the waivers in your dynasty league. And maybe you
So
have like shallow benches or
with
something.
Fab. Yeah.
And you can just drop all the fab on that. But I mean, that seems fairly unlikely at this
Yeah.
point. But I mean, I don't know. I'm guessing if you're asking this question, you have some flexibility. So we'll assume you don't have a trade deadline. If there's no trade deadline, Ben, what should they do with Justin Herbert?
There are a few legitimate QB3s that I would not bite the bullet and just like be fine starting with. So like if you were smart enough to roster like a Goff on top of Herbert and another elite quarterback, or if you picked up a Browning or a Flacco last week, I feel okay. Just like if you're not like a favorite, maybe you're a younger contender and you don't think this is going to be your last shot to win the championship, I feel fine rolling one of those guys out. I'm doing it. I'm not doing it myself in any leagues, but if Stroud misses a week, I will have to play, it looks like, a Desmond Ridder, or I'll have to trade Stroud. So I'd rather stick with a QB3 if you can, but if you don't have a guy who you feel confident in, even if you have like a Minshew or someone in that range who doesn't really seem like they're going to be scoring difference making points, you kind of are forced to tier down or tier up and just massively overpay. Like I don't mind adding a 25 first on top of Herbert to go up to like a Lamar or a Josh Allen or something like that. And I'd be looking to make a move like that with any rebuilder who has an elite quarterback on their roster. That's pretty much your only option, is just try to shed Herbert for points, and you're going to have to compensate for the injury and for the leverage, which is really what it boils down to.
Yeah, definitely an option. I'll also throw out there, you can try to just go make that move for a QB3 and hold on to your quarterback. Like if you don't have Jake Browning or Joe Flacco, you can just like trade a 4th round pick. If you're not getting a fair deal for Justin Herbert, just give up a little bit of value so that you can hold on to him and you can get that quarterback. So like I traded a 4th round pick for Jake Browning in a spot where my playoffs actually started this past week and I had Kyler Murray on bye. So I really needed to play a quarterback. Browning obviously had a great game, and that worked out for me. But you can go buy that quarterback without even using the quarterback you already have. It just depends what assets you have on your roster.
Yeah.
But with Herbert, I would trade him for Kyler straight up. I'm fine with that.
Yep.
On a contender. His matchup's a little rough this week against San Francisco. But finals week he gets the Eagles, who have just been absolutely bleeding fantasy points to quarterback. So that's pretty exciting
Yeah.
if you can get there. I'm tentatively okay with Trevor Lawrence as a straight up trade. I'd like to get a little plus on top if you can.
Yeah, I wouldn't exactly be thrilled about swapping for Lawrence for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're going to be close enough in the offseason that like you can stomach that value loss. But I would definitely rather try to get like if you can get a future second thrown on top, I'd be very happy with that.
Yeah.
Or you can try to go up and get Lamar, which is what I did with my last Justin Herbert share in the DFF Dynasty Best Ball League. I have Justin Herbert, and I also have a first round bye. Not really looking to go into the semifinals with Gardner Minshew, Will Levis, and Geno Smith as my only quarterbacks. They're okay, but like in a best ball format, I'm trying to get a heavy hitter in there. So I was able to move Herbert and Christian Watson for Lamar and Deontay Foreman, which I was fine with. Like I like Christian Watson as like a dynasty best ball kind of bench wide receiver. He's got that spike week upside, but he's not going to help me too much here down the stretch. And I was okay giving up the value for what I think I can get from Lamar in the semifinal and the final. So something you can look into as well.
That also really boils down to, like we say this all the time, but each league's trade market is a microcosm of itself, and it's going to vary from league to league. I have a league where some guy is a contender and he just lost Herbert, and he offered me a Lamar trade, and I countered with something fairly similar to what you just mentioned, with like Herbert and not a substantial plus, but a legitimate asset.
Not a throw in,
like not a throw in, like a real difference maker. And it got slammed in my face, and it was like that was the most disrespectful offer I've ever gotten. Like, what are you even thinking? So you got to play the leverage game. You have to know your league mates. You have to know how desperate they are, how long their window to win is, and make your offer based on that is what I'd say.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to know your market. And that's why you got to have a lot of options, because you can't just immediately go like, it's not just an ATM. You can go to the Lamar owner and exchange your one Justin Herbert for one Lamar Jackson. Like it just doesn't work that way. There's human psychology involved, different managers. Like if a manager in your league needs Lamar because they're a contender, that's not going to work. They're going to want to keep Lamar as the QB4 on the season. So you just gotta go case by case. You got to get creative is the big thing. Next question comes in from Matt. That's all I got. His name is Matt. He asked this question on Twitter, and he said he's in a new league. It's a poor quality league, kind of inactive, weird rules, small benches. Debating whether or not he should leave next year or not. The league isn't great, but he has a good core of players. So basically, he just wants to know if it's worth staying because he has a solid team, or if he should just dip out of the league and go find a better league, which that's kind of where I lean. Like, I don't know if it's a league where you feel like you can really exploit your edge and you feel like you're really set up for a run. Maybe you stick around for another year and just see what happens. Like you've already paid into it. It would be nice to kind of leave with some money. But overall, like I'm always going to lean towards leaving a league like this because first and foremost, you're playing fantasy football for fun. And if it's not fun, you're also not going to be very dedicated to that league. Especially if you like can't get trades done or people are difficult to deal with. So I lean towards leaving.
That's sort of what I said too. I don't think like we have that team. Both of us have it in front of us, and it's like it's not a guaranteed championship contender. It's definitely like a great team, and it would be. It does look like it would be a playoff team, but there's just way too much variance that goes into every season to make it worth staying in a league that you're genuinely not happy being in. Even just because your team is above average or in playoff contention. It's just like there's going to be 6 playoff teams. There's only going to be one champion, and you have really no way to secure yourself into that, no matter how weird or inactive the league may be. So I'd probably leave as well.
Yeah. go find a good league. Maybe jump on Twitter, find some other Factory Tour fans, and see if they want to start a league. I'm thinking about trying to start up like a Dynasty Best Ball league this off season. See if some listeners want to join me in the new format that needs a lot more publicity. But yeah, there's good leagues all around. You can definitely find one and enjoy yourself. All right. Next question from Fantasy Taco 420, easily the best name that we got a question from today. Their question is, and it's also a good, interesting one to think about. He asked, with Dynasty players seemingly caring more and more about weekly outcomes, should this impact draft strategies? So I'm assuming this is kind of about the day trader mentality that has sprung up in kind of the Dynasty terminology, the idea of people who play Dynasty like it's, day trading on the stock market. Ben, have you seen players play this way, and do you think it should impact draft strategies at all?
I think that me and you both kind of played this way a little bit this year, and I think that there's a place for it, but it shouldn't affect draft strategy. I think that it should affect how you approach the fantasy season. I think that with people being reactionary, you have to sort of pick and choose when to be reactionary. And also, me and you have been preaching this all year long. You need to trust your gut sometimes when you feel like there's a young player breaking out. Like I bought Puka Nakua on a rebuilder that was sorely lacking in value, and I sent my 2025 second for him after week 1, and I was rebuilding. So that's kind of a bit of a risky trade to make for a 1 week breakout rookie, but I liked what I saw, and I thought that the value was going to go up, and it ended up working out really well for me. So I think that it should affect you on stuff like that. I think that you need to know now that we have to be quicker to react to breakouts than maybe we previously had to because of that sort of day trading phenomenon. But it's not going to affect my overall process, and it's definitely not going to affect the way that I draft my teams next year.
Right. So I'll say no, it shouldn't affect my draft strategy because I already kind of draft this way, but I do think it should affect other people's draft strategies a little bit. Like I approach Dynasty from a value mindset first and a production mindset second. Like I'm thinking about when I'm acquiring a player, what is their range of outcomes in terms of trade value? So like if they meet expectations, what are they going to be worth? If they bust, what are they going to be worth? If they surpass expectations, what are they going to be worth? And in the context of my league, like what I think can happen in my league in terms of trades, what can I do with that player in the future? And I'm not just thinking like, is this a good player? Is this a bad player? Like I've bought players that I don't think are that good because I think they're going to be valuable. So I think a good example of this would be like Jordan Addison versus Quentin Johnson, which was a big debate in the offseason and rookie drafts. They went back to back. You look at Quentin Johnson, he's this raw upside play. Like the overall value upside of Quentin Johnson in a hypothetical world where he's not terrible is higher for him than Jordan Addison. And that was the argument, like alpha size, potential top target for Justin Herbert. The receivers there are old, so eventually he's going to be the one, and Jordan Addison's always going to have Justin Jefferson. So the actual upside is with Johnston. But if you think of it more in that day trading mentality, you think of Jordan Addison, who's going to be an immediate starter on a high volume passing offense that's very competent. He's a good prospect, so he's capable of producing right away. Which of these players is going to be worth more sooner? Like which one is going to distance themselves from the other sooner? It always seemed like Jordan Addison was going to spike right away in a way that Quentin Johnson probably wouldn't. And so I preferred Addison over Johnson for that reason. It obviously worked out like way better than anticipated. But even if Johnson had just been fine, we still would have seen Addison leapfrog him in value because of that immediate opportunity.
That's a great point. And we talk about talent over situation all the time, but the truth is that that's how you should approach your drafts. Is you should be trying to draft talented players who are going to gain in value. That's just the best way to play. It's how you play. It's how I play. And if people observing day trading is going to push them towards drafting for value over situation, then that's the right direction to be heading, in my opinion.
Yeah. So it's definitely not dramatically altering things, but you certainly want to be thinking about what can happen in the near term, like for the player that I'm drafting. Like if Caleb Williams tore his ACL tomorrow, would he still be the 101 in rookie drafts? Like he probably still has the best career outlook of any rookies in the draft, but I don't think he should be the 101 because there are multiple rookies that are probably going to surpass him in value over the course of a year while he's not scoring points and they are. So like, I'm not going to still just draft him because he's the best player. Like I would take Marvin Harrison Jr. I'd probably take Drake May, just for the sake of like thought experiment. Stay healthy, Caleb. But that's kind of how you have to think about just what are going to be your opportunities with a player. And it's more important the more active your league is and like the more trades you think you can actually pull off.
That is also a really good point, that if you are going to draft a guy who you're projecting to grow in value, you have to make sure that your league aligns with you on that. Because if I'm in a league where elite QBs really aren't held in that high regard by pretty much all of my league mates, so me having 2 elite guys doesn't really accomplish all that much for me as far as the trade market goes. It might help me win games, but it's not going to help me pull any deals off.
Right. All right. Next question comes in from Mega Based Takes. He asks, is Kelce a sell, hold, or buy? Lame answer is it's context dependent. Like don't buy him on your rebuilding team. Don't buy him if you're planning to tank after this season. I don't think it's worth it to buy him for like 3 games based on what he's going to cost you. I'd much rather either pay up for like a young emerging tight end or pay down for somebody that has like a good schedule. I don't know who has a good schedule in the fantasy playoffs, but like just pay down for some bargain option. I don't know, Taysom Hill, if he's coming back this week, I'd play him in my tight end slot. But if you have like you're contending right now and you think that window is going to be open for you next season, I've got no problem buying Travis Kelce for a 2-year window. Like if you think he can help you right now and help you secure a buy next year, that's fine with me. I don't have any reason to believe that he's like washed or that he's going to retire.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, if Travis Kelce's on a contender, he's more expensive right now than he's probably ever going to be again.
Yeah,
and it's pretty cut and dry. If he's not on a contender, he's probably a pretty palatable move for you to make. But odds are, at this point in the season, a contender will have bought Kelce, and he's a hold if you're in the playoffs. He's a hold if you're a contender, and he's a buy if he's available, pretty much.
I mean, what percent of Travis Kelce's aren't on current playoff teams? Like,
I'd be shocked to see it. Yeah, no, there's just no way. I mean, definitely like across my leagues, 100% of Travis Kelce teams are in the playoffs.
I did actually have a situation this week that made me kind of mad, where a playoff team like had several injuries and they were just kind of limping into the playoffs, and so they decided to like sell off, kind of, even though they're making the playoffs, they're like, I'm just selling off because I'm not going to win. And they ended up selling Travis Kelce to one of the other better teams for George Pickens and Chigakonkwo.
That's horrible. That's really bad.
I don't have a lot of self-control in those situations. Like I have to say something in the chat when that happens. Like if a trade goes down like that, where I'm directly being affected by it, it just makes me mad. So
are you a contender in that league?
I am. I'm probably more of a pretender. I'm not sure. It's hard to say because it's a best ball league. So it's like, it's tough to really weigh. You have to like think about the depth of your roster and not just like the top end, but I don't know. It's a good enough team, but there are some absolute powerhouses, and it was not great seeing the 2 seed pick up Kelce for that price. So anyway, I guess there's some teams like that out there. If you can buy him for that price, I'll buy him on any team. But in terms of what his actual price probably is, I'm really only interested if I feel good about my team going into next season.
Yeah, that's about it. That's about it. It's pretty, like you said, the lame answer is it's very context dependent, but that's kind of how it is for Kelce and all of those other like Keenan Allen, Tyreek Hill, Christian McCaffrey assets, where you love them in a short term window, and if you're playing any kind of long game and you have any amount of draft capital, you probably don't have any need for him on your team.
Right. All right. Next question comes from Paco40U. He has actually 2 questions. One of them should be easy to answer, at least. Safe to drop Sky Moore and Alec Pierce in Dynasty? Sure. Yeah. If you want to pick up someone else, those are when you look up roster clogger in the dictionary, there's a picture of Sky Moore and Alec Pierce holding hands. They're not guys you're ever going to play. They're not good. They don't earn targets. They don't score fantasy points. So I'd be looking for any like running back handcuffs you can stash, or players that we don't already know are bad, or even backup quarterbacks. I mean, look at how many backup quarterbacks have become relevant this season. I mean, you're probably better off just holding those.
Yep. Pretty much. If you have to pick one, if that's the question, I'd probably go with Pierce, but neither is really where we're at, I guess.
I drafted a lot of Alec Pierce in best ball, and he's had one good game this year.
Hey, man, if Anthony Richardson was still playing.
Would it be better for him? I mean, maybe because
I think so. Pierce is a downfield guy.
A lot.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it definitely was big for the Josh Downs enthusiasts.
Yeah. This is not any kind of meaningful asset for sure, though. So
no,
even
with Richardson back, we're not going to count on him. But he might have had a couple more spike weeks for my best ball teams. That's all. But he's not a guy you want to start in a managed format. The second part of the question was, what quarterbacks are likely available on waivers that might be worth picking up for next year? This is a very difficult question to answer because there's almost never quarterbacks of consequence available on waivers in Dynasty. Yeah. So, I mean, if I had to guess, that my answer would be none of the quarterbacks currently on waivers will be relevant next year, at least not starting week 1 or not when you would expect them to be. But if you've got space, I think Jacoby Brissett is a guy you could stash that's got potential to be on waivers. Maybe Sam Darnold. Those would be two guys that haven't been put in starting spots, so they might be on waivers that I think are at least high-end backups in decent situations that maybe have a 2% chance of ending up as starters on teams because of how bad the quarterback position is.
I'll throw Tyler Huntley's name in that mix too. I have 70% exposure to Tyler Huntley because God forbid Lamar ever goes down. Tyler Huntley is a rushing quarterback, so he'd immediately vault up into the 18 to 20 points per game range just based on his role, his role alone running the read option in that offense. So again, 2% chance that he's starting next year. Didn't start a game this year, but that's kind of the bet you're taking at that point. It depends on your roster size too, I'd say. But like you said, the odds are none of the guys on waivers right now are going to be remotely relevant.
Yeah. But if you've got some spots to kill, you could look at one of those guys. I mean, there's almost.
I like Brissett a lot. That's a good one because he's always he's always a solid producer whenever he's in.
Yeah. So I mean, anybody like that that is someone you can start when they get hurt, but who? I guess anybody can, right? Because I didn't think Tommy DeVito was going to score.
There are 32 backup quarterbacks in the NFL. They're all worth a roster spot if you can afford it.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't think Jake Browning would be worth starting in fantasy if he ended up on the field, but he has been. So,
and there's no universe where I would have called that a year ago too. There's no way I could have guessed that.
It's a weird game
because they don't even know who their QB2s are at this point for next year. Who's to say that Jake Browning's even the Bengals' backup quarterback next year?
Yeah, I mean, the way he's playing right now, he probably is, but
he should be. But I don't. Someone will offer him Jarrett Stidham contract, and he'll walk for 2 years, $10 million.
That's definitely possible. Maybe he'll be starting for the Raiders next year.
I have no words for that.
Wow, the absolute silence that followed that statement. Hopefully, Jaden Daniels, right? Jaden Daniels.
Yes, I have two. There are two things that the Raiders could do this offseason that could actually cause me to stop rooting for them, and one of them is not have a serious long-term answer at quarterback. So,
well, good luck. Next question comes from Sad Cub Fan 69. Caleb or Marvin Harrison Jr. at 101 on teams with 2 elite quarterbacks if you have to draft a player. So no trading back. No trading the pick. I'm drafting Caleb Williams. I draft rookies for value, not need. And have you seen the quarterback position? I don't think having 3 elite quarterbacks is a bad thing. You could have 3 elite quarterbacks and still have none in the fantasy playoffs at this point. So I think you can always look to trade later. But I'd be very comfortably taking Caleb personally.
That was exactly what I said. I wrote Caleb and worry about the rest later. I think that I've made subtle hints over this college season that the 101 to 103 might be more of a tier than I thought it was, but That was shameless misinformation spreading by me, and Caleb Williams is the 101, and there is really no argument otherwise. Doesn't matter
Yeah.
who you have on your team.
And even regardless of personal valuations, like if somebody
Yeah,
has a different evaluation, the market is going to dictate that Caleb is the guy. There's going to be
yeah.
I think there's going to be a sizable gap in startup value between him and the next guy. So it's still in your best interest to take him at 101. And
Where
that's
would
what
you
I
take
would be
Caleb in a startup today?
doing. I would personally probably take him around 7 or 8.
Yeah,
I think his value is going to settle in there, if not higher. Um,
I was around like 5 or 6.
yeah, I mean
So
I
same
mean it's
range.
around there. Like you got to think about, him versus Stroud, him versus Herbert coming off injury, him versus
Definitely.
Lamar. Like that's where you're talking about. So you're not going to see any other rookies in that kind of discussion. And so you just want to take that guy, figure it out later.
Yeah.
You don't know when that trade's going to materialize. Like I've had rosters where I had to just kind of sit on the extra quarterback for a while. Something comes up almost always.
It's a
So
long off season.
yeah. All right. Nick FFL asks, what is your favorite dynasty team build? For example, lots of value stored in quarterbacks, wide receivers, lots of picks, etc. Ben, why don't you take this one first?
I think me and you are probably going to align quite a bit here, but obviously 2 elite quarterbacks is the biggest thing and the one pillar that I try to make sure I have hammered down on all of my dynasty teams. Um, Other than that, I always try my best to secure an elite tight end, and I have a pretty successful rate of doing that. I think I'm at like 6 out of 7 of my like top 5 kind of tight ends on each of my rosters, and then I love anchor running back too. Like I have a lot of Jahmyr Gibbs. I have some Brees Hall. I have a Bijan, and it's nice to have one of your RB slots locked in because that's one less RB slot that you have to sort of fill in, which is what I said for the rest of the team. Is you find Keenan Allen's, you find Isaiah Pacheco's and Kyron Williams's, and you fill up the rest. But really, those 4 slots, that being QB1, QB2, tight end 1, and RB1, I definitely try to make sure I check all of those boxes off on all of my teams.
Yeah, that's a great way to build teams. I totally agree with that. The elite quarterbacks for me are number one. I'm always trying to see how can I start my team off with that building block, at least one of those foundational quarterbacks. But I
Yeah,
did several startups this year where I was able to grab like Lamar plus Dak or Hertz plus Richardson or something like that.
yeah.
And that's how I like to start out. And then adding
Also
an elite
9
tight end
Kyler
is
Murray's.
right. Adding an elite tight end is great, unless it's
Yeah,
Kyle Pitts, and then you have a dead roster spot for the whole year. But yeah, I mean, I do agree. Like trying to get that elite tight end, if you do it right, you've now got a positional advantage there. You've got a positional advantage at quarterback, and then you can kind of build out the rest because there's just a lot more players at running back and wide receiver that come out of nowhere. Like your Puka, Tank Dell, Nico Collins, Kyron Williams, like guys you could get for less than a second round pick at certain times that are now league winners. It just doesn't happen as much at the other two positions. So you want to open yourself up to more variance at running back and wide receiver and just assume that things are going to come up there. The hero RB build is great. Like if I think that your RB2 in most situations should be the worst position on your roster or on your starting lineup. Um, and you can just sort of have a bunch of running backs and just fill them in. Like if you had Zach Moss, like great, you've now got a guy you can start for the first 4 weeks, right? And then some other running back comes
yeah.
up that you can play, and you can sort of piece this stuff together. Raheem Mostert, was borderline free at times this season, so I think that's a good way to build. I don't agree with the teams that try to put all their value into young wide receivers. They're not as stable as people think. There's this thought that like young wide receivers that are elite are like always valued as if they're elite, and it's just not true. Like the first year that I played a lot of dynasty, the top receivers were Chris Godwin, Juju Smith-Schuster, DJ Moore. Like those were the elite wide receivers. Those were like the CeeDee Lamb, Garrett Wilson wide receivers of that year, and none of them
Yeah.
ever gave you that season that you really wanted from them, that won you your league. So, and then they lost value. So I don't not against rostering elite wide receivers, but I don't like when people make that the foundation of their team rather than quarterback.
Yeah, it again. It all depends on the rest of your league and how they value those kind of guys as well. I have one of my leagues where I've sort of been boxed into building around that because everybody else is an elite quarterback and elite tight end guy, and I picked up an
Mhm.
orphan, so I've been forced to sort of use like Garrett Wilson and Devontae Smith and Tank Dell as my real core over there. So you do what
Right.
you have to do. And obviously, the more competitive your leagues are, the more sharp players you're going up against. It's going to be tougher to just be like, oh yes, I have two elite quarterbacks. I have an elite tight end and an elite running back one. I'm
Right.
schooling all you guys. But when you can do it, that's how I would prefer to build a dynasty team for sure.
Yeah. Definitely great points. And there's not really like a wrong way. Like
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
you can build a team around elite wide receivers that is
Yeah.
awesome. It's just
Oh yeah.
it's maybe it's a little bit more fragile, so maybe it's like not the number one route, but it can work.
Yeah.
Nick had a follow up here as well, which is biggest lesson learned from 2023. The thing I was going to say, you actually brought up earlier, which is buying into breakouts early. That was the thing I had written down. So I talked about this on the show with Jacob Sanderson that we did, I guess, week 6, week 7. And it was like, buy into these young, especially rookie breakout players immediately when they come onto the scene and they immediately command 15 targets in a game, like Puka Nakua. They have a 50% target share, like Zay Flowers. They score 50 fantasy points in a game, like Devon Achan. Just buy those guys. Like they're it's not easy to do that kind of thing right off the bat. And the odds that you're gonna whiff, like massively whiff on that type of a trade, um, is very small. Whereas the odds that that player is going to continue to rise in value is pretty high. So I'm going to be trying my best to pounce on those opportunities more quickly.
And the best part about that too is that if you're early enough, the whiff doesn't even hurt you that bad sometimes. Like you'll lose a 2025 second or you'll lose a 2024 third if you tried to buy in super early. And if you miss, you
Yeah.
miss. That's it. It's fine. But the cost of admission, if you are jumping the gun on someone, usually isn't going to be as bad as it really could be.
Yeah.
Um, for my biggest lesson, other than that, obviously, because I think that that was also a big takeaway that I got from this year. And I think that a lot of people got from this year with how many, it felt like there were more breakouts for sure this year than there usually are. But I guess my other biggest lesson learned would be other than other than a 2024 first, my picks are liquid, but I really don't want to move my 2024 first as eagerly as I did this year. I sort of jumped the gun on a lot of like mid-tier trades that I probably shouldn't have done. And now I'm left with like all of my 2024 first consolidated onto my rebuilds, and none of my competitive teams have their own 2024 first.
Mm.
So I sort of do believe in the logic of like, if you're going into the playoffs is a serious contender and you have your 2024 first, you're not trying hard enough. But that doesn't apply to the 2024 first. I would much rather keep that first because I think that that's such an insulated asset, and that's literally how
Right.
you add value out of nowhere, out of thin air to your team, is by hitting on draft picks.
Yeah.
So I'm sad that I traded a lot of my draft picks away, and I'm not doing that again.
Now, are you saying specifically this year or just the current, like whatever, like current year first you have?
Yeah, just like whatever current year first. Like I would prefer to hold on to my current year first, unless the value is like absurd.
Right.
I'm really going to be a lot
Yeah.
stingier with my own current year first
I
and
gotcha.
my next year
Yeah.
first, honestly too. Like I don't really
Yeah,
want to move it.
I'm actually very hesitant. So I've traded away most of my firsts on
Yeah,
my contending teams, not because I think it's something you have to do, but unless you have a very high value roster where you can, construct or you've drafted just like really well, it
yeah,
is hard to construct like a buy quality team and hold on to that pick.
for
But
sure.
where I'm really hesitant is trading the future first. Like I've traded almost none of my 2025 firsts.
Yeah,
Like I mentioned, I've been stockpiling them because it's so much harder to know where those are going to fall and what your team's going to need in that
yeah.
year.
And you
Where
just want to give yourself that kind of flexibility too, you know?
exactly, because you just don't know, like you just might end up in a spot where your team's worse than you think, and you need a tank. You don't want to have to be going and trying to get your first back.
Yeah,
You want to hold on to that. So once you know your team's a playoff team, you need to switch into thinking that next year first is more valuable than this year's, because this year's I know is a back half pick. That one could be anything, right? So
yeah,
in that sense, I do want to be I do want to be more cautious with the future picks, but you don't want to be going out and just throwing your picks into these mid-tier deals like you said.
Yeah,
You want to be holding out until the last possible minute. Um, or I guess it's not even a timing thing. It's more of like, what can you get? You can only fire this bullet once. Um, you want to use it in a trade for something that's like really going to make a difference for you.
absolutely. That's what it really boils down to. You really want to be getting like actual value over replacement if you're going to be moving off a 2024 first, just because of how much insulation and how much upside that kind of asset has. And
Yeah.
like you said, with the first that's a year out, it's always hard to not think about who the actual players that those picks will turn into is. And like a lot of people are going to be saying on Twitter that the 2025 class will not be as good as the 2024 class. And while they might not even be wrong about that, process wise, I generally try to treat each class as if it's the same, because we really don't know that much about them. And, every class that we hype up, at some point in the season, people are going to say that it's a total miss. So you just have to stick to your guns and hold on to those picks as dearly as you can.
Yeah. I also don't think it has that much effect on the actual buying and selling power of the picks. Like people talk about it online, but it's like when you go to actually sell a first, I haven't really seen any particular draft year be like harder to move first. Like everybody wants first. It doesn't matter what year it is. People still want the picks. So once you get closer to draft season and like people start to assign a certain player to a certain slot, yeah, then it's harder to like trade up to the 103 or something. But before you get locked in there, like right now, it doesn't really matter who's in the 2024 class other than like the 101. It's just that people want first. So I agree with you there. You don't want to think too much about who's in the class. And players come out of nowhere all the time. So nobody knew Joe Burrow was a thing like before literally the year before. Like if you were buying a 2020 first at this time of the season in 2019, like you wouldn't be thinking, oh man, that might be Joe Burrow. Like, but then he ends up being the number one pick. So, it's just too much uncertainty.
Yeah.
One example of a spot where I did think it was worth trading a 2025 first. I had a pretty strong team. Oh, there's the cat back again, I guess, locked in here. I had a really strong team where I was confident that the team's still going to be good next year because I have a lot of like depth and just overall value. And I was able to get Travis Kelce more or less straight up for a 2025 first back around like week 5 or 6. And so I thought, okay, well, I'm going to benefit from that trade for this full season. I'm going to benefit from it next season. And I'm not too worried that this pick's going to end up being early. So this is the kind of difference making deal that is like worth me pulling the trigger on that.
Yeah, there's just a lot that has to go right for it to make sense for you. And it sounds like that's kind of the circumstance where it is okay to pull the trigger. But generally, like it's an asset you'd rather have on your roster because it's so much more valuable with you than with anyone else. So I love 2025 first, and I'll definitely be buying those all off season as they continue to be such a great value.
Exactly. You go by 2026 first as well. If your league allows that. The next one comes from Ethan Ebert, and he asks, best way to convince my league mates to remove trade deadlines. Well, I don't know. I haven't had a lot of success transitioning leagues with trade deadlines to leagues without trade deadlines. But I mean, I would just tell them to like look around. I'm sure there's multiple teams in your league that have already been hurt by a trade deadline. If they have Jonathan Taylor or Justin Herbert or Nico Collins and they're in the fantasy playoffs, they're probably wishing they could swing a trade right now. And then maybe if the teams that aren't in that spot are hesitant, tell them to, consider what kind of trades they could be making, how they could be benefiting. They could be getting Jonathan Taylor or Justin Herbert at a discount due to the leverage that they have from non-contenders. From contenders needing points in their lineup. So I kind of think it's a win for everybody, but I know that not everybody agrees with that. Ben, where are you at on the great trade deadline debate?
I sort of don't care that much, but I do think that it's just more fun for everyone. So that's the real argument that you want to make, Ethan, if this is something that you're trying to pull off. I also haven't had any success. My home league tried to transition from a trade deadline to a no trade deadline this year, and they were all like, if we get like a 10-0 vote, like let's just do it this year. Like I'm so sick of this, and it immediately didn't pass because two people like the trade deadline. And if you want to have a trade, I mean, there's a reason that professional leagues have a trade deadline, and that reason doesn't apply to our fantasy sports. We don't have like team chemistry and like morale that we have to worry about, and like the actual bonding and meshing of it of a group. It's just numbers for us. So it's more fun for everybody. It's more fun for contenders to be able to buy win now pieces while they're in the playoffs. It's more fun for rebuilders to win trades off pure leverage and just add value to your roster. So I don't there's really no reason to have a trade deadline unless you just want one. That's it.
So I am definitely pro. I'm anti trade deadline. I'm pro no trade deadline. And I have heard that argument of like, oh, all the real sports leagues have deadlines. I don't know why that matters. Like, there's a lot of things that real leagues do that we don't do. I don't know. It's like, we're not trying to create the same thing. And I think one thing that does matter is like the NFL is creating a product for people. And part of that product is the narrative elements of a season, like the idea of like you start in one place and you finish in one place, and that like tells the story of your season. And so, yeah, like if the Chiefs trade for Devontae Adams the week of the Super Bowl and then he like wins them the Super Bowl, it's like the story of that season is kind of like weird and disjointed. And it's like he didn't go on
There's
that
no
journey
continuity
with them. Yeah. And so like for part of what it is for people is like it's not just a game, it's like they're watching a story unfold. And I think that matters in fantasy. Like, we're not doing that. You're not like, this is a game we play for money. There's no one that's like going back in time and like telling the story. Like, no one's gonna make a 30 for 30 about how you won your fantasy league. Like, it's not, nobody cares. So just, you can go trade for Ezekiel Elliott in week 15 and it's fine. Like, it doesn't matter. If everyone in your league thinks it's more fun to have to like stockpile a bench so that you can survive injuries in the fantasy playoffs, then more power to you. Like, you can play the game the way you want to play the game. But I do think it's more fun for more people to allow trades. And I also do think that it creates more balance in the league over time because rebuilders have more leverage right now than they have at any other time during the year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're in total agreement on that. And at the end of the day, it boils down to who your league mates are. Like, I'm not going to leave my home league because they want to keep the trade deadline because it's more fun to some of them. It's just sometimes you have to put up with rules that you don't love, and it's okay. It's part of the game.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in leagues that go both ways. I was really, really dreading the trade deadline in one league where I have Tyreek Hill last night, but it's okay. Like, he's alive. But I was really concerned that I was just going to be like totally screwed out of having my best player on my team because of the trade deadline, and so that was scary for a minute. But Tyreek Hill is fortunately made of rubber, so it's all good. We got 2 questions to go. We've almost made it through this whirlwind of a mailbag segment here. But we have one here from Fantasy Zoc, and he asks, what do you think the future of running backs is as an asset? Does it continue to decline due to volatility or risk, or maintain due to scarcity of guaranteed volume? Yeah, this was an interesting one. Ultimately, after I thought about it for a bit, I don't think we're going to see a whole lot change from where we currently are. I think we've already seen the most of the shift in the position and how it's valued. Like, if you look at startup drafts from 4 or 5 years ago, there were a lot more running backs going in the first 4 rounds than you see now. So I think we've already kind of seen that shift to account for the lack of workhorses in the league. So I don't think a lot is actually going to change from here. There's still going to be those high-end running backs that succeed either due to just pure volume or efficiency or a combination of the two. And those players are always going to be valuable as long as your starting lineup has 2 running back spots.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that, like you said, the shift has sort of already happened where there is a group of valuable running backs. And then after that, it's really, really dry for like 5 rounds of startup drafts. It's Bijan, Gibbs, Brees at the top, McCaffrey, AK, and ETN, Jonathan Taylor, and then Javonte, and like the 50th, 60th overall asset in Dynasty. It really it falls off really hard, and that's what we should expect it to be. Like, it's going to be always a very limited group now at the top of guys who do get to quote the question directly, guaranteed volume. although really none of it's actually guaranteed, and it's all going to be quite fleeting because that's just the way that teams want to invest into their running backs now, is by not putting all of your eggs in one basket. It's the right approach to take. So yeah, I mean, they're just not as valuable as they used to be. They're definitely going to be difference making guys in fantasy, and running backs will still be league winners. But as far as how you approach startups, as far as how you approach rookie drafts, you know, they've made their move, and they're no longer what they once were.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, I think you could argue that there's an edge developing, like leaning into the uncertainty at running back. Like if you want to stockpile all of the like Rashad White, Isaiah Pacheco type of guys that are getting super discounted in startups because their roles are not for sure, their talent maybe isn't for sure. Maybe that's somewhere you can win. But I don't think we're going to see a shift where those guys are going to start going earlier and earlier, even if they do keep scoring points, because people have already been burned too many times by the running back injuries, running backs getting replaced in the draft. So, and just with the dynamics of like how few running backs actually get that draft capital every year, and then how many actually hit, you're always going to have a lack of young, elite, highly drafted running backs. Like there's always going to be a low supply. You're never going to have more than like 6 or 7 of those guys in the league because there's only 1 or 2 of them per year that come into the league. So,
and they have such a short shelf life is the worst part. So
yeah, exactly. So you're not going to see tons of guys in that Bijan zone. It was crazy a few years ago. It was like you could get through the first round and it was like CMC, Saquon, Dalvin Cook, Alvin Kamara off the board. Joe Mixon goes in the second. Eckler goes in the second. Derrick Henry goes in the second. Like people were buying the running backs. And then it's just a couple years of injuries later. It was just, it wasn't worth it anymore. So
yeah, it's like a Hydra, but in the wrong direction. It's like as soon as we get another elite running back, 2 of them are going to fade off into obscurity. And it's kind of a bummer. Exactly. Like I miss when running backs were like all the rage in fantasy. Like that's how it was for me growing up. It was like, oh yeah, like I have the first overall pick, I'm going to take Le'Veon Bell. Like I miss that vibe. It was kind of cool. And when the guys touching the ball the most, other than the quarterback, were the guys we wanted to roster, but
make running backs great again.
Yes, that's the campaign for this offseason.
It's been especially bad.
I believe in Braylon Allen.
Running backs, all the young running backs have been suffering the season-ending injuries. Like we had Javonte, Etienne, Breece Hall, like all of these young running backs were also having devastating injuries. So that was really hurting the position. Hopefully those guys can at least stay healthy.
Cam Akers twice.
Oh my gosh, Cam Akers, poor guy. J.K. Dobbins twice.
Yeah. 3 times.
Brutal. So yeah, that is the sad truth of the running back position. But I don't think we're going anywhere too crazy from.
Yeah, I don't think anyone is going to be surprised by what we just said too. Like it's just the state of the union. Make running backs great again.
Yeah. All right. Last question comes in from @Marbury. How much is Howell worth to the 2 seed that lost Herbert? Superflex with Lamar and Ritter as the only healthy quarterbacks. I mean, that's just going to depend on their team and like how desperate they are to find a replacement. For some people, I guess he could be very valuable. Other people who think he's not very good or just want to like ride it out with their own guys, he's not going to be that valuable. So, I mean, first question would be to ask them, like, do you have interest in Sam Howell? If they do, that I guess the question of what you ask for in return would be the next part. What do you think about that, Ben?
Like you said, it's very context dependent. Reading what like the rest of the question of who that guy has on his team, it's Jamar Chase, Deebo Samuel, Saquon Barkley, and Austin Eckler. Those running backs to me scream that there could be like a little bit of a closing window element of leverage here. So if you can pull a mid-late first for a Howell, if he's desperate enough, again, this all boils down to, does this guy like Sam Howell really? Like if he doesn't think he's good, he's not going to invest really any kind of long-term substantial asset into what would be like a Desmond Ritter equivalent. So it's gotta be the right the shoe has to fit. If that makes any sense, because there's just there's a lot of microcosms within the trade
I'm
negotiation there.
I'm guessing a team built like this probably doesn't have their 2024 first at this point. Like
Yeah, that's
I would
true.
be surprised. So for me, there's two paths. I think trying to upgrade into Herbert using Howell would be great. Like if you could
That would be
add
sick. Yeah.
add to Howell and get Herbert, that's awesome for you. Obviously, I'd add up to a first pretty easily. Not your own first if you're tanking, obviously, but an extra first or something. That would be great. More realistically, maybe you could try to get their 25-1 and 25-2. Um, if they're really in on this year, they might be fine with trading like a far away pick and like not even think about it. But they look like they have kind of a fragile team. And by taking, taking away their 25-1, you now have a lot of power in your hands. Like if things go wrong for that team, that could end up being really early. Even if it ends up late, you're probably still winning on value. So just kicking that can down the road and taking a later pick can be a big win for you a lot of the time.
Yeah, I like both of those a lot, and just something around that kind of value range is more than enough for me to move off of a Sam Howell, especially if I'm a rebuilder. So
yeah. Awesome. Okay. Well, that gets us through all the questions. Hopefully, if you asked a question, I answered it. I tried to grab all the ones that I saw there when I was putting the show sheet together. But this has been great. I love being able to just tackle the topics directly that people are worried about. And there's not a whole lot of like actionable stuff that we can do with the playoffs because of trade deadlines and because the season is like mostly played out. So at this point, we just kind of have to see the fruit of our labors, see how things go. If you're playing in the fantasy playoffs this week, I hope you win and I hope you can advance. Maybe you can get Ezekiel Elliott to help you with that. Ben, do you have any final thoughts for the people before we get out of here? And is there anything that you're working on now or in the off season that you'd like to make people aware of?
right now, I'm working on integrating by parts, but in about 2 weeks or so, I'll be back on my scouting grind. I'll be starting my film reviews for the 2024 class. I'm gonna try to get a couple YouTube videos out and some prospect profiles over the course of December and January. But yeah, that's about all I'm working on. I just joined the DFF Devy ranking crew, so I'm now doing Dynasty and Devy rankings. So go check those out. Available on the website. And yeah, that's about it. Go make some good trades if you have leverage and make it happen. Make the magic happen.
Sounds great. And yeah, any of that stuff for Ben, you can find either on dynastyfootballfactory.com. That's where our written work goes, and that's where his ranks can be found. And then if you're watching on YouTube, Dynasty Football Factory, hopefully you're going to start seeing some thumbnails pop up that aren't just my hastily made podcast thumbnails. Maybe some videos featuring Ben breaking down some prospects, maybe some other stuff. So subscribe to the YouTube channel, Dynasty Football Factory, if you are not. You can follow me on Twitter at Paul_DFF. You can follow Ben at BWinkNFL. He's tragically underfollowed at this time, so you guys got to get on there. He's always great. It's always great having you on the show, Ben. I appreciate you coming on kind of last minute here, and hopefully we'll be talking to you soon. The rest of you, I will talk to you next week. I promise no more weeks off, at least for a little while. So I've got guests lined up. And I'm excited to get back to you guys next week. All right. Have a good one.